Hi, in this video, we're going to be talking about modal verbs to give advice. We're going to be looking at the modal verbs should, ought to, could, and the semi-modal had better. Hi, my name's Charlie. Welcome to Organic English. I'm here to help you become more fluent in English. Now today we're looking at modal verbs again. But this time we're looking at modal verbs to help us give advice. Up here I'll put a link to some more videos I've made about modal verbs. We're going to be looking at should, ought to, could, and the semi-modal had better. Now of course there are plenty of other ways to give advice. There are plenty of other phrases and words that we can use. But I'm sticking with these three. My philosophy is always to give you just enough information. I don't want to overwhelm you with too much information. YouTube rewards longer videos, but I don't think that's an effective way of learning. So first, let's recap. What are modal verbs? Modal verbs are auxiliary or helper verbs, and these are verbs that have special properties that help other verbs. They help to express your attitude, how you feel about a thought or an idea you're expressing. Now, there are two important things that are true about all modals. First, they don't change. If you're talking about the past, present, or future, first person or third person, they do not change. There's no ending, there's no ed, there's no ing, there's no s either. So it's always should. Second thing, they don't have an infinitive form, so they never take to before them. So you can't say to should, to could. So let's get into using these modals when we're giving advice. So straight away I'm going to tell you we use should most of the time when we're giving advice. So let's look at some examples using should. Jenny's sick. She should go to the doctor. She should go to the doctor. This shows that I think it's a good idea for Jenny to visit the doctor. So should is always followed by the main verb in its base form. So that means there's no to added to it. Here's another example. I'm worried I'm going to fail my test. Really? Maybe you should study harder. Maybe you should study harder. Okay, in those two examples, did you notice the placement of the modal? Where is the modal? It's after the subject, but before the main verb. And notice the modal verb doesn't change. She should, you should. Okay, there's no s added after should when it's she. And the main verb is in its base form. No ed, no ing, no s added to it. And there's no to before the main verb. We can also give advice after the result has happened. I failed my test. Really? You should have studied harder. You should have studied harder. That's should followed by have and the past participle of that main verb. Studied. You should have finished your homework before you went to bed. Notice the pronunciation. Should have. Should have. Let's look at some examples in the negative now. You should not study all the time. You shouldn't study all the time. You need to relax too. Here you're just adding not after the modal verb. You shouldn't have wasted all that time playing video games. Let's look at ought to now. Ought to is not used as much, but sometimes you will hear it, so I'd like you to be aware of it. Here are some examples. You ought to see a dentist about that toothache. Or in more natural speech, you ought to see a dentist about that toothache. You ought to see a dentist about that toothache. I ought to give my daughter a cell phone. I ought to give my daughter a cell phone. In the negative, should not Shouldn't is used 99% of the time. Ought not to or ought not are correct but are rarely used. For example, we ought not to interrupt his phone call. This is not used very much. We would normally say we shouldn't interrupt his phone call. You ought not to leave your dirty clothes on the floor. Again, we rarely say this. Much more common to say, you shouldn't leave your dirty clothes on the floor. Now let's look at the question form. When we ask questions, we only use should. For example, should we leave for the theatre now? Should we leave for the theatre now? We never say, ought we to leave for the theatre now? Shouldn't you be studying for your test tomorrow? Shouldn't you be studying for your test tomorrow? But we never say, ought not you to be studying for your test tomorrow? See how clunky and complicated that gets? Should is much easier, much smoother. Another modal we use for advice is had better. Had better. This is usually referred to as a semi-modal. Now, had better is really quite strong, it's powerful. When you use had better, you're saying that there will be a bad result if the person doesn't do what you advise. Here's an example. You'd better remember your keys this time. You'd better remember your keys this time. So the result of you not remembering your keys this time is that you won't be able to get back into your house. Bad result. Again, the simple form, the base form of the verb follows the modal or the semi-modal. Here's another example. We'd better not be late for class. We'd better not be late for class. The result, the teacher will not like it. Bad result. Now here's a quick tip. When people speak, they often drop the had and say you better, he better, we better, and so on. But don't write it this way. If you're writing, keep that had in or the contracted version, apostrophe D. If you want to say the result, which is in the future, you add or before it. Here's an example. You better get here on time or you'll miss the train. Here's an example of the negative. She had better not forget to bring the tickets or we won't be able to get in. Okay, so now let's take a look at could. Now could is very different to had better. We use could to offer an idea or a solution for someone else to take. Could is not judgmental. It doesn't tell you what is right to do. It leaves that decision to the other person. Here's an example. Let's say you lost something from your bag. You could go back to where you last opened your bag and take a look around. Or you could take a look in the pockets of your backpack one more time. You could ask people if they've seen it. All those bits of advice I'm not invested in. I'm not judging. I'm leaving it up to the person who I'm giving the advice to. So a quick recap. Should is the one we use the most. Ought to, we don't use very often, but it's good to be aware of it. Had better implies that there will be some kind of bad result. And if you use could, you're really not bothered. You are giving the advice, but you're not passing any kind of judgment. I hope you'll be able to use these modals to help you give advice straight away. You can also go to my website, www.organicenglish.club, where you'll find plenty of other resources to help you become more fluent. Thank you very much for watching. Now go out and practice giving advice using modal verbs.